If there's one thing I cannot stand, is when companies actively remove useful features for the name of progress. The most obvious example, of course, is Apple and the headphone jack. This was supposedly removed to save space. If I didn't know any better, I'd buy it. For smartphones at least. Apple, your Pro tablets are meant to be for professionals. You have pro-level video and audio apps on there. Why does it not have a headphone jack? Why does it only have one port? And yes, space is a premium in something this small and compact, so I sort of get it. I mean, it's a miracle a brick that small can already do so much. The trouble is, I know better. I used to daily drive an even smaller brick. I used to daily drive this. Oh, and look at that. It still managed to have room for a headphone jack. Okay, so it was removed for waterproofing maybe? Nope. My first Android phone was a Sony Xperia Z2, and somehow that managed to fit not only waterproofing in it, but also a headphone jack. Shocker! It even had magnetic charging, so you didn't even have to open the ports on the phone up. Not only that, but you could remove the SIM card and the SD card. Yes, it had an SD card, without any tools. It also had a dedicated camera button. This was, I think, 2014. And you could even use a HDMI cable and plug it into a big screen. Now, it didn't have any dedicated desktop mode, but still, for the time, 10 years ago, this is crazy. And you know what's even crazier? This thing was still plenty thin and light, and it had a premium metal and glass design. There were quite literally no compromises with it. But unfortunately, I smashed the screen, so I decided to try out the iPhone SE, first gen, for a little while. And this was okay, but a couple of years later and the battery was starting to give out, so I needed an upgrade. We all hated the dreaded notch when it first arrived on phones. We all mocked the iPhone for having it. So of course I went down the rabbit hole for finding a phone without one. After a lot of searching, I came upon this. This is the phone I'm using today, which is a Xiaomi Mi Mix 3. It has a lovely AMOLED display with no notch. And how did they do this? Yep, they used a slider. And I was so happy with this phone. And to be honest, it's still plenty good enough today for most people. It's got 8GB of RAM and 256GB of storage. Absolutely plenty for most people. I mean, no waterproofing. Good luck with a slidey mechanism like that. But unfortunately, that also wasn't the only compromise. Because of that slidey mechanism, a good quarter of the phone had to slide forward, so the battery is much smaller. It also has no micro SD card and no headphone jack, just a simple single USB-C port. Now, for most people, this might be enough, and this phone is still doing okay aside from the battery now, which is starting to degrade, but I use my phone minimally anyway, so it really doesn't matter until it gets absolutely horrendous for me. But next time, I am going to be sure to get a phone with much fewer compromises next time, even if that means getting a budget or a mid-range phone. But you don't have to be removing features in order to be screwing customers over. Just look at Apple's latest Mac Minis. It's got a blazing fast new M4 processor, it's got the best performance per watt in the industry, and it's only 256GB. You know what also has 256GB of storage? My phone! It's an acceptable amount of storage for a phone, not for a laptop, not for a desktop. And an extra £200 for 256GB is just daylight robbery. Apple, we know how much storage costs, and it is nowhere near £800 for 2TB. £800! Ultimately, we are at a point in time where we need to stop and reflect what we expect from our technology and what we're going to do about it. The EU is already putting some restrictions in place. They're mandating user replaceable batteries in consumer goods, which should be put into effect later this decade. But that's still some years away. What can we do now? Well, for starters, we can just keep using what we have. I don't need to upgrade this. This is from 2018, but it's still good, it still works. Don't upgrade if you don't need to. I made a stupid decision in 2020 and bought the last Intel MacBook Pro. And yes, there are so many better laptops, but I haven't had any problems with it. So I'll keep using it until it is no longer viable. Secondly, we can repair our products rather than chucking them out. Granted, phones are tougher than most things to repair, but it is still a fraction of the cost rather than purchasing a new one. You should refuse to use companies that serialise their parts and actively make sure that phones or features in phones stop working as soon as that component has been replaced with an alternative. Apple, I'm looking at you. You're probably the worst, but there are plenty of other companies that do this. Thirdly, be very conscious about what you do purchase. Sometimes things really do break and we have to replace them. But there are companies who are doing better. Fairphone and Framework have been pushing for more repairable and upgradable electronics for a while now, and although their products might be more expensive and not as slick as their equivalent counterparts from, say, Samsung, Apple, Dell, etc., how much do you really need it to do? Do you really need a top-of-the-line processor to scroll through YouTube all day? So, I think we should all be considering our electronics as investments. Spend your money wisely, and as always, thanks for watching, and see you next time.